Today's story is straight out of a nightmare. I mean, once you fully learn the story after listening to it and on what the family went through, because it's downright horrifying. And again, that's once you listen to the full story. And once you do, put yourself in their shoes and tell me what you would do. So with all that being said, let's begin today's story. Our story really begins in 1986. The two teenage sisters, Annie and Jessica Andrews, who for some time were in a good spot in life. They had a good family, they had a good house, they had food on the table, and again they had money, they had clothes. Basically they were just good. But all of that would come crashing down when they suddenly lose their mother to cancer. To which I think everyone can relate. If you lost your mother or have lost your mother, you know how that feels or how it's going to feel. And this feeling doesn't number anyone, no matter who you are. And this death was quite abrupt, and it really took the family by surprise, because mainly their mother was a fit woman who had never really had problems in her life, to suddenly getting cancer and then passing away from it, all in a pretty quick time span. We just really hit the family hard. So following the death, the two girls would live with their father full time, and his name was Brian Anders. Brian, who was already a hard-working man and was just scraping by, but he would never really mind because he could live like that. But now, having these two girls who had come from a more luxurious life compared to him, he knew that him scraping by wasn't going to be enough. So with that, he would have to work harder to create additional income for the family. And again, the two daughters were hit really hard by losing their mother. But that wasn't the only bad thing that stemmed from losing their mother. It was also the fact that since their father had to work double the time to make double the income, he would have to work longer outside, which meant they stayed inside the house longer by themselves. And when I mean longer, it's basically majority of the day, which of course was scary for the girls because, well, they're not really used to being alone in the house all the time. But to be fair, that initial scariness would gloss over and would turn into crying sessions for the two girls, just grieving for their mother. But these crying sessions would lead to something else that would kind of turn into a curiosity session, if that makes sense. And from the curiosity session, they would lead them to something that they would do which they shouldn't have done. One night, Brian would leave for work, and the girls, instead of sitting down, they would decide that instead of sitting down and doing nothing, let's try to get in contact with our mother. Now, of course, you're probably thinking, how are they going to do that? Or some of you probably already know. And if you don't know, well, there's something called an Ouija board that could help contact their mother. And if you don't know what an Ouija board is, it's basically like this wooden board that has 0 to 9 on the top and then the alphabet on the bottom, and then underneath that was the word goodbye. And on the top of the board there was yes or no. And to actually use a Ouija board, you need something called a planchette, which was basically a movable indicator. And to really set the mood, you would sit in a room with only candles that would light up the room. And once everything was ready, you would call out to the spirit. And in theory, the spirit would guide the planchette that you should be pressing down on and would make you spell out a word, basically. And that was its way to communicate with you. And so that was the basics. So now the girls in their basement, they would set up the mood with the candles lit around, but they wouldn't exactly know how to use the board. And so all they would do is put their hands on the planchette and they would call out to their mother's spirit, asking them to give them a sign if she was here. So as they're waiting, the girls had no faith that this was going to work. They really did this because they wanted to connect to their mother, who again they missed terribly. So as they're waiting and waiting, nothing would happen. And remember, their father wasn't here, so they had time to kill. So after about an hour or two of trying to communicate with their mother's spirit, they would eventually give up and put the board away. Now, even though it was a fail, it was technically a success in the girls' eyes, because mainly to them, spending more time thinking about their mother was to them success. Now, after putting the board away, the girls would go upstairs and would have a low-key night and then eventually go to bed. And the girls had gotten pretty used to going to bed alone without their father being there. But to be fair, they never complained because they understood his situation. And so both of them would lay in bed and they would begin to drift off to sleep. About 10 minutes since the girls laid down and tried to go to sleep. And by the way, quick heads up, both girls slept in different bedrooms. But anyways, about 10 minutes in, Jessica would sit up. Why? Because she could hear a tapping sound and it didn't sound normal. So after listening to this tapping sound, Jessica would go into Annie's room and would ask Annie, hey, can you hear this tapping sound on the wall? And Annie would reply, yeah, I hear it too. And both of them would sit in silence. But once they went silent, the tapping stopped. But after 2 minutes of sitting in silence, the tapping came back. And it sounded like the sound was coming through the walls. And of course, the girls didn't know because they've never heard this before. But instead of being scared or being creeped out, the girls instead felt quite happy and hopeful because this could potentially be their mother communicating with them, which to me and you may sound far-fetched, but again, remember, these girls were quite young, and the fact that they really truly missed their mother and would use any excuse to get a closer connection to their mother. So as the two are looking at each other now, listening to the tapping sound, They would tell each other that this must be our mother, and our little science that we did must have worked. And without a second wasted, once they realized that it was their mother, they would begin to ask their mother questions, such as, are you here with us right now? And can you show yourself to us? And just questions that you would ask if you thought that there was a loved one in your room that was a ghost. Now, with the reassurance that their mother's spirit was with them, the girls felt at ease because they knew that their mother was looking out for them. Some time would pass and eventually the father would arrive from work, and the tapping at this point had fully stopped. And as the girls heard the door open and saw that it was their father, they would rush over to him and tell him about all this tapping sound that had been going on and that they were actually happy about it. Which to again Brian, who had been working all day and also was grieving for their mother or his wife. And to him, he thinks that the daughters are making it up, especially when they told him about the Ouija board. Once he heard that, he began to think to himself that, they're also grieving with the loss of their own mother and they're probably struggling, and I feel really bad for them. And to be fair, he would consider the first night to put them in therapy, not because he was upset with them or anything, but really because this was like a manifestation of grief, and sometimes it could take a long time to get over it, which could be a problem. But ultimately he would say to the girls that, yeah, I'm sure that she's looking out for us, but let's talk about this more tomorrow. So the girls would say okay and would head back to their rooms. Once everyone was in bed, Brian would be laying in his bed thinking about trying to take the girls to counselling, but eventually after thinking for a while he got too tired and he fell asleep. Now this tapping sound wouldn't be for like a 1 or 2 day thing, it would happen persistently over several days, and not only would it keep going, it would become more frequent to the point where it would actually start to disturb the girls' sleep. But the problem was, every time the girls would tell their father to come into their room to listen to this tapping sound, the tapping would stop. And so not only would this make the girls look ridiculous in front of their father, it would also just kind of drive them mad. And it wouldn't stop there though. Once the family left the house to go out as a family together, so now the house is empty, and they would come back home to see that things have been moved. Not much, for example, like a furniture would be moving slightly, if that makes sense. Or sometimes silverware would be moved around. It was just them small little things that around the house would be disturbed. And every time Brian would see this, he would blame it on the girls, and he would tell them that, I know you miss your mother, and I know you want this to be real and want this to be your mother doing this, and just to be with us right now, but unfortunately she's not. And I have to ask you to stop this whole ghost thing, and also you need to stop moving the furniture around, because this whole thing that you're doing isn't healthy, and if you keep going, I'm going to ask you guys to start seeing grief counselling. And as you can expect, the girls were insisting that it wasn't them, but their father just didn't believe them. But to the girls, they knew that they didn't move anything or touch anything. So with this situation brewing, the girls were in a really bad spot, because now instead of being happy, they were scared, and they just felt totally alone because their father didn't believe them and they didn't have anyone else, unfortunately. And also they now knew that this couldn't be their mother, because they knew that their mother wouldn't be messing around with them like this and getting the girls into trouble with their father. So now with this evil spirit that the girls had unlocked through the Ouija board, and now is terrorizing the girls, and unfortunately the girls couldn't do anything but to hope and pray that this thing leaves them alone. So now skipping some more time, on January 1987, the girls were together out in their front room of their house, and as they're sitting there, they would suddenly hear a tapping sound once again, but this time it wasn't through the walls like they usually hear it, but this time it was coming down from the basement. And for some reason they got the sudden confidence to get up and go down, because if their father wasn't going to believe them, the only thing that they could do is to go investigate themselves. So that's exactly what they would do. So they would head downstairs to the basement, and they would open the basement door up, and to turn on the lights to the basement, it's downstairs, so they'd have to go down the creepy dark corridor that leads to downstairs. So as they began to walk, with each step making a creak, with each step also being louder and louder, and the darkness becoming more visible. Once the girls finally reached to the bottom of the basement, they would have one hand on the pull string to turn on the light, and then they would take a deep breath in, and once they turned on the light, they were fully expecting something to be down here, but there was nothing. And they also noticed that the tapping had stopped. So really, after feeling quite silly or making this whole thing a big deal, and the fact that they were going to confront a ghost, they would turn around and they would walk back up. But just as they turned around, they would notice writing in red that says, "Come and find me, I'm in your closet." And of course you can guess the girls were horrified, because this also confirms that this thing was messing with us and it wasn't our mother. And it's now interacting outside of it's just tapping on the walls. It's now actually writing on the walls. girls. And so once the girls read the message, they would hightail it out of there because this message felt like a threat. And the tapping on the walls was kind of a threat, but this thing takes it to a whole nother level. Since their father was working, the girls would exit the house and would run next door to their neighbours. And of course, it would knock quickly, and pretty quickly the neighbours would open up, and the girls would say in an out-of-breath tone, "Hey, can we stay here with you for a minute because something weird is happening in our house?" And they would go on to describe the weird writing, but not too much in detail. And the neighbour, once heard the situation of the girls, would ask them to stay with her until their father came back. So as soon as Brian gets back home, the three would flag him down. So as he comes to his neighbour's house, the neighbour would pull Brian to the side and would basically explain everything that happened. You know, about the girls coming towards the house hysterical and telling them that there's writing on the wall, etc. Brian's reaction was what the girls had feared about. And he would look at the two and would say, "This is out of control, you guys are doing too much." And so after giving them a lecture, the three would head back into the house and would go down to the basement, and Brian would see the writing on the wall. And once again, once he saw this writing on the wall, he would blame it on the girls and would tell them that you guys are now really ruining the house just to live this fantasy of yours. And so seeing this, he knew that the line had been totally crossed, and this is getting totally unhealthy. And with this done, he would order the two to go to see grief counselling. Several weeks would go by with no tapping, no nothing, just silence in the house. And it was like whatever this was had just stopped. But once again, one night, Brian was working late into the night, and the girls were once again alone. They're in the front room and they're just sitting there. And for the last couple of weeks, it had been relaxing and refreshing, not having any strangeness happen in the house. But all of a sudden, they would start hearing tapping once again from somewhere else in the house. And so curious, but also petrified, they would get up and they would make their way over to where they think this tapping sound was coming from, which this would lead up to Annie's bedroom. And so slowly they would go up to the door of Annie's bedroom, and the girls' hearts are racing at this point. But they knew that whatever was behind that door needed to be confronted. And so both girls would have their hand on the doorknob and they would count back 3, 2, 1, and they would open the door. And once the door was flung open, the girls would take a look inside of the room, and once they saw what was inside of the room, they would turn around screaming and exit in the house. Now, there wasn't anyone there, but just like the basement walls, on the walls was written in red, "I'm back, find me if you can," just like last time. The girls again would run to the same neighbour's house and again would knock on the door and would explain the situation to the neighbours. And the neighbour would say once again, "Stay with me and we'll wave your father down." And the same thing would happen again. The father would come back home from work, but he would get flagged down by the three, and then he would make his way over to the neighbour's house. The neighbour would tell Brian that there's been writing written on the wall, this time in Annie's bedroom. And now Brian is mad and he tells the girls that I've put you into grief counselling and I'm telling you to stop this because it's not okay and it's not healthy. And so after this rant, he would tell the girls to stay there and he's gonna go to the house by himself and just check it out. And he's gonna search the house from top to bottom and show you that there's nothing to be afraid of in this house. And so he storms his way to his house. And once he opens his door to his home, he's shocked because the entire house was in disarray and it just looked like someone had ransacked the house. And with this new discovery, he would begin to think to himself that there's no way that the girls could have done this. Someone else must have done this. There is no way that two teenage girls could do such a mess. I mean, there's things heavy such as a couch and other heavy objects in the house that no matter how much the girls pushed and pulled, it just wouldn't do anything. So now Brian would walk into his house on edge and he's not hearing anything. And then he would make his way up to the bedroom of Annie's. And then of course he would see the writing on the wall. And the writing on the wall was on the right side. And then once he turns to the left and looks into Annie's closet, he sees a man standing there wearing woman's clothing, which those clothes belonged to his dead wife's. He was also wearing a wig and in his hand was a hatchet. This man in the dress was staring right inside of Brian's soul. And of course Brian was stalled of this discovery, but before he could proceed on what was going on, this man would run out from the room. Brian would try his best to grapple him and fight him, but the man in the dress managed to run past Brian and run into the rest of the house. Brian, who was still caught off guard by a man who was wearing a wig, his dead wife's clothing and also a hatchet, and by the time he decides to chase him or to stay put, the man had long gone. And so he would search for a bit, but the glaring fact of this man holding a hatchet would scare Brian enough to just leave the house altogether. Once outside, he would run to the neighbor's house and would tell them to call 911 because there's somebody in the house. So police were quickly called and they would quickly arrive at the scene and they would also quickly begin their search. And even though the police would search the house from top to bottom, literally literally everywhere in the house. No matter how much they searched, they couldn't find this guy in the dress. And they would say to Brian that, I'm sure there's someone in your house and you've told us a very convincing story, but unfortunately that there's just no one here, and all we can tell you to do is to not be in the house until whoever this person was caught. So instead of living here again, you should just go live with your relatives instead. And in the meantime, we'll watch your house to see if anyone will come back. But unfortunately, other than that, there's nothing much we can do. And so obviously you can guess, with having little to no options, the father and the girls have no answer to their horrific problem. And Brian is thinking to himself, how in the world did he get away? Like, it doesn't make sense. A guy wearing a dress that I saw not leave from our house from the back or front, but somehow managed to evade the police when they began to search his house, just doesn't add up. But either way, for the next 2 weeks, Brian and his daughters would stay at a relative's house. But also in those same 2 weeks, no one was found, and the man in the dress was still a mystery. Brian and his 2 daughters were traumatized, especially Brian, because now he felt guilt and just a terrible father. Because not only did he leave his girls in a house alone with a madman, he also didn't believe them when they began to tell him that something was wrong. And he's just thinking about all the worst outcomes that could have happened if he hadn't discovered that man. Of course, the girls were traumatized because they thought they were interacting with their late mother, but it turns out to be some crazy person wearing a dress and also holding an axe. And it's just this whole horrible situation. And to be fair, living with their relatives would get tough because it was a tight place that they were living. And eventually they would decide that, you know what, whoever was living in our house must have gone away by now. And we've got the police looking at our house, and so we should just go back home. But lock everything up, get security cameras. Again, there's police watching our house. Let's just go back home. And pretty quickly they would pack everything up and they would head back home. Now Brian is driving up his street and he looks at his house and he could clearly see that there's a light on the second floor. Now he's thinking to himself that I thought the police were looking at the house from the outside and were just patrolling the neighborhood, and I wasn't expecting them to be in our house. So now he's telling himself that as he's looking up and now pulling into his driveway, he then suddenly sees the guy in the dress walk across the window that the light was on, and Brian sees him clear as day and he stops. What's he doing up there? Surely he should be gone, as Brian's telling himself this, before quickly calling the police. The police wouldn't waste any time surrounding the full area with their police cars, and once everything was ready, they would head inside. Now to note, the day that Brian and the girls had left the house, they had locked the doors and no one has entered the house. And the police knew that because they were the ones monitoring the house. But when the officers opened the door, the first things that they saw was all the furniture had been flipped upside down and moved all over the place. And there was pennies glued up to the ceiling, which was really strange. But which was even more strange was on the walls all over the house, there was red writing, and these writings would have strange cryptic messages. But either way, they would search the house, and one officer was down at the basement and he would notice that there was this little piece of wood that was covering up what looked like to be a crawl space behind the washer and dryer, and he found out that he could easily move the washer and dryer. And there was this board, and when he pulled it to his side, it was an entrance to a crawl space, and in the crawl space they found that someone had burrowed between all the insulation all around the house into the walls, and there was these little peepholes that were all around in different rooms, and whoever was in this crawl space could look into any room in any time that they wanted. And as they searched in this intricate crawl space that spanned around the entire house, they would find Danny LaPlante, this totally deranged teenager who had briefly dated Annie, and Annie had broken off the relationship with him. And so I guess in revenge he'd snuck into the house and had been living in the walls listening to their conversations, and of course the passing of Annie's mother, and in a sick way would adopt this routine of I'm going to be your dead mother. And he had been writing on the walls with ketchup and had been doing the tapping, and he had also watched the girls do the Ouija board, and so he really had all this evidence and all these things to work with to just scare the girls. And so he had been sneaking out and been moving the furnitures around for months, and then he would go back into the walls again for months. And that's not really the worst of it. Daniel Plant, after he was brought out from the crawl space and was arrested and would be put into juvenile detention, but once he later got out of juvenile detention in 1987 for reasons that no one understands, and I don't think Danny understands himself, he would break into someone's house and would murder the entire family in cold blood. And again, no one knows why he did it. Our story starts in Pontiac, Michigan, 1986. Nathaniel Abraham would be born into this world, and right from the get-go, he would find life to be quite difficult. Months after he was born, his father would leave his mother, and this would create incredible hardships for the family. because mainly Nate was not the only child. It was him, his mother, and 5 other siblings. And of course, due to his mother quickly running out of money, she would have to go pick up a job and then another job on top of that. And this was only just to keep the family afloat. And these jobs were not easy at all. From the moment she wakes up, she would have to go to work. And then she would work both them jobs and then come back home earlier the next day. So basically it was work from day to night for her. And because of this, she was never around the house. And so Nate's older siblings would have to step up and look after Nate. This would of course naturally make Nate sad. Because again, obviously he doesn't get to spend much time with his mother, and the little free time that he gets with his mother, she's usually exhausted in these times and she can't really do much with him. And so for him, it didn't really feel like she was in the moment with him, if that makes sense. So it doesn't really count either way. This would not only make Nate a sad kid, it would also go on to make him an antisocial kid. And to be fair, this is a normal situation for kids, and it's an easy fix as well. Usually both parents would fix it out and they would diagnose it quite early by making them more outgoing and doing other stuff. But in Nate's situation, he just didn't have that luxury, and so naturally things would become more worse. As he grew up, the world of crime would become more appealing to him, and of course that was thanks to his behaviour spiraling out of control each year as he gets older. And just by the age of 9, he had become into a very troubled kid, with a record of a serious middle-aged criminal. And again, by the age of 9 to 11, Nate would go on to have 22 police encounters. And these weren't good police encounters, of course. There were many different reasons for these encounters, such as arson, some were for assault, and there were several breaking and entering. The worst part about all these 22 encounters, 5 of them involved the use of a weapon. One of them was when he maliciously attacked a 14-year-old kid with a steel pipe. The kid was becoming into such a problem in the neighborhood that the neighbors surrounding his house would begin to move out, all because of Nate's behavior, and because since he was so unpredictable and at any moment you could be his next victim, a lot of people were like, we're not taking this risk, and so they would move out from this neighborhood. One of the neighbors that was leaving because of Nate would go up to Nate's mother and tell her that Nate's gonna kill somebody if he keeps going on the way he's going. And Nate's mother, she couldn't say anything. All she could do was just take this feedback in, because she knew herself that her son was becoming out of control, and already is out of control, to be fair with you. And the sad thing was that there's nothing that she could do. During this time of Nate's rise of bad behavior, she would just feel helpless, because almost every single day there would be someone knocking on the door reporting on what Nate had done to them. She would go to the police for help, as she wanted them to intervene in her son's situation, but instead of helping her, they would just refer her to a juvenile court. But she wouldn't be there for long, because they would send her back to the police, telling them that her word wasn't enough. Now, coming back home after this whole mess, she's sitting on her couch and she just doesn't know what to do, because no one was ready to intervene. Now, the era that Nate was born into certainly didn't help at all. Most of my viewers are Americans, so you know what the 80s had brought. They brought a lot of good things like the sports world, but also they brought a lot of bad things. One of them was widespread violence in major cities such as New York, Chicago, but it wasn't the widespread violence for adults that grew. It was a massive amount of juveniles that had begun to stop crime. Between 1980 and 1994, the number of juvenile homicide offenders doubled, and this was mainly thanks to the crack epidemic. In the inner cities, this drug had become like the plague, and it wasn't long before firearms and juveniles got paired together. Children were used to do the dirty work during this time, because it's a main fact that no one really expected a kid to hold a gun or to hold any drugs, especially class A drugs. Also on top of that, they were cheaper since they were kids and they required less money. And since they were cheaper, it was also less riskier, which for the person that was selling the drugs was definitely appealing. And even if the kid got caught by the police, which of course happened a lot, since they were so young most of the time, they would get let off. So this was Nate's background, and hanging around with this crowd really set his behaviour into place. It also set many ideas into Nate's brain. Michigan, the state that Nate grew up in, saw that the juvenile crime rate was going up too high. So them, along with many other states, would begin to start convicting kids under the age of 17 as full-grown adults if the crime was big enough. They would call this law Get Tough on Juvenile Offenders, and this was a very pivotal moment for American juveniles. October 31st, 1997, police officers would get a call on an arrest that they needed to make. So the officers who got called were quite unkeen on doing this because, well, they were so used to this and it just felt repetitive. But once the officer heard more information about what this person had did, They quickly put aside their boredom and cracked on with their job. And it wasn't long the officers were on their way towards a building that they got told that person was going to be in. Once they got in front of the building, they would get out of their car and would make their way into the building. And inside they saw loads of children in their classrooms. But they would head into one specific classroom because they knew their target was going to be there. So once they got in front of the door to the classroom, without knocking, they would open the door up and would begin to start scanning the room for their target. And to be fair, right away they would spot their target sitting at the front of the room. Once they found their target, they would walk up to him and they would go, "Nathaniel Abraham, we're putting you under arrest." Then they would begin to read his rights. Nate's teacher would look at Nate, who was still wearing a Halloween costume, and would go on to say that his face was expressionless for a child that had just been arrested. It was almost like he knew the police were going to get him and arrest him. A day before the arrest, October 30th, 1997, an 18-year-old boy by the name of Ronnie Green had passed away unfortunately after fighting for his life for about 24 hours. Now, I'm probably guessing you're asking what happened to Ronnie. And well, it was a normal day on October 29th. Ronnie was out. No one knows what he was out for or what his intentions were, but either way it doesn't really matter. And so either way he'd do his thing and then eventually make his way to the convenience store. And so he would walk in and then eventually do his thing and then walk back out. And across the convenience store with all these trees and bushes, behind these trees and bushes were more houses. So it was like a wall in between the convenience store and the houses. And behind those houses was more houses and houses. So you get the idea of the layout. So as Ronnie begins to walk away from the convenience store, he would hear a sound of a bullet coming towards him and missing him on his right shoulder. And before he could even react to that bullet, another bullet would come flying straight at him. And unfortunately, it would hit him straight in the head. Just hours before this, Nate and his friends were walking around the area and they would walk past his gun shop. And one of the members of this group would kind of tug Nate by telling him that, "I bet you can't steal a gun." Nate, who was almost a teenager now, wasn't having any of this. He felt like if he said no to this or chickened out, his pride would get hurt. And his ego, of course, would take a massive hit. And without saying a word to the friend that, made the claim, he would just put on a mask and then walk straight into the store. Members of the group began to walk away from the store and just get far enough so once a commotion begins, they have enough time to run away. Just about 3 minutes later, they would hear a man who was the shopkeeper of the store screaming at Nate to come back here. And he wasn't just standing there and screaming, he was chasing after Nate, who eventually burst out of the doors and began to run in the direction of his friends. And of course, he wasn't empty-handed. In his hand was a rifle. His friends, of course, were shocked and stood still for a second in kind of an amazement on how the hell he stole that, because they thought that he might get lucky enough to steal a pistol at most. So the fact that he stole a rifle made no sense, but either way, they would snap out of their trance and begin to run. As they were watching as Nate was coming closer and closer to them, the shopkeeper also was coming closer and closer, they all suddenly started laughing. It was like this adrenaline rush that the group craved for. Nate, who was still at the back, was laughing as well because he found this funny, and also he loved that adrenaline rush as well. And about after 5 minutes of running, they eventually lost the man, but knew that there was no way they could actually keep a hold onto this gun for long before the police would track them and arrest them. So at the time that they had, they would reload the gun. Yes, Nate had also stolen bullets with it and would pretend to fire the gun. And they would only pretend for now because they were trying to find a good spot to practice shooting the gun with. So with the limited time that they got, the group would work together to find a good spot. And it wasn't long before they got to a section of trees, and behind the trees were bushes. And Nate would stop the group there and would tell the group that this is a good spot. Originally, the group said no, it's not, but Nate would somehow convince them that yes, this is a good spot. And also, if you're just going to keep wasting time trying to find a good spot, we're eventually gonna have to throw this gun away without even trying it. So let's just use this spot before ultimately we don't get a chance to use the gun. The group still disagreed with Nate, but they saw that Nate wasn't going to change his mind, and so they said, "You can shoot it, but we're not going to shoot it." So Nate would begin to aim the gun, and he could hear in the background his friends trying to tell him to change his mind, and that we're going to find a better place if we just hurry up and just drop the gun. But Nate would blank all the sound out and would start to aim at the bushes, and then slowly he put the finger on his trigger, and then he would shoot 2 bullets. The first shot would obviously cause some commotion because, the gun has just been shot. But the second bullet that Nate had shot with the gun would be recoiled with screams. And at this point, Nate and his crew would flee the scene. And the reason why there was screams when the second bullet was shot, not because, yes, a gun had been shot. It was mainly because the 18-year-old Ronnie had been shot straight in the head. And of course, now you know the culprit was Nate. Nate would be taken to the police station and would be interrogated by investigators. He would quickly tell the investigators that he had no no idea that Ronnie would be there, and he had specifically no intentions of killing anybody. And then he would go on to say that he just wanted to try out his new gun. But the investigators were not buying that Nate was only trying out his new gun. Nate would see that and would still try to convince him that, yes, this is the truth, and it was just a genuine mistake. But the investigators were not budging. They would just straight up tell him that you did this on purpose. And again, Nate was like, no way, that was definitely not on purpose. I mean, yes, it was a stupid idea that had all the percentages of going wrong and getting someone hurt, but I can assure you it was definitely not intentional. But little did Nate know, the investigators had something up his sleeve that would change the whole dynamic. And the investigators would put up a chat log with Nate and his girlfriend, and well, on this chat, Nate would tell his girlfriend that he really wanted to kill somebody. And on the day of Ronnie's death, Nate would tell his girlfriend that I had just killed somebody. And once Nate had seen these chat logs, he was out of ideas and was just stumped. Nate would go on to be convicted with the murder of Ronnie, and he would actually be tried as a legal adult, despite only being like 12 years old at this point, and he would get full punishment. This would actually cause a lot of conflict. A lot of people agreed that yes, he should be tried as an adult, again, because there was a new rule set in place, but there was an overwhelming amount of people that thought that this wasn't fair at all, and they were just overall against the whole decision of trying him as a full adult. The group that disagreed would go on to protest and would say that we need to protect our children. Delinquent or not, they need to be protected. This would actually play a massive part in the trial, because let's say he went on to be tried as an adult, he would spend the rest of his life in jail. But eventually, again, this case making a massive uproar and actually a split in the community, the judge would get a request from the prosecutors. And what was that request? A blended sentence, which meant Nate would be held in a juvenile facility until the age of 21. And to their shock, it would actually get accepted. And Nate would find himself in juvenile detention, where he would stay there for 8 years. So Nate would be moved to the Michigan Department for Human Services for treatment. During this time, he was actually a good kid and would get his GED, and the following year he'd get his high school diploma. And so 1 year before his release date, the state thought that they had done a good job turning this kid around and getting him acting like a normal man. So on the 18th of January 2007, after spending an almost entire decade in juvenile prison, Nate would go back into the real world, but this time as a changed man. But just a year later, on May of 2008, he would get rearrested. You see, even though yes, Nate had improved as a person, he still had one issue that really held him back, which was his anger. And throughout the time in the center, he would randomly have these fits of rage whenever something went wrong. The people that helped him back to become into a normal man thought that this was something that's going to go naturally over time, which obviously they were wrong, and this would take him into another dark path. Once released on May, he would get rearrested for having 254 ecstasy pills and would get sentenced to 4 to 20 years in jail. He would get let out in 2017, but then get rearrested a couple of other more times. I couldn't find what he did, but either way, all that work that the state did to get him back into a normal human just didn't work at all. And I think till this day he's still in prison. I'm not sure. You'll probably have to search that up for yourself. Our story starts in a place called Kobe, located in the Hyogo Prefecture of Japan, and it was also found 300 miles west of Japan's capital, Tokyo. Hyogo is known to have big castles, such as Himeji Castle, and it was also known for its wide selections of resorts and towns. But it doesn't stop there though. If you go to the capital of Hyogo, which is Kobe, it contains one of the largest seaports. Not only that though, Hyogo is also well known for its academia, with multiple research institutions. But anyways, near the city of Kobe is where our main character of today's story is born, and his name is Issei Sagawa. Born on April 26, 1949, so just 4 years after World War II. But despite being born into a country that was deeply exhausted and very injured from that war, you would think that Issei would have quite a rough childhood. Well, at least a bit anyways. But you'd be completely wrong. In fact, he would have the opposite. His childhood would be amazing, which was meaning relatively carefree. He would have 2 loving parents and also rich parents as well. His father, Akira Sagawa, was the president of Korea Water Industries, which is a company that now has over 5,000 employees and over 200 billion yen revenue. His grandfather also happened to be one of the most successful editors for Asahi Shimbun, one of Japan's largest newspaper publishers. Now yes, the life of Issei sounds amazing, but unfortunately it's not all sunshine and flowers. You see, Issei was born prematurely, so doctors thought that he wasn't going to survive at all. But he would, but in a result of that, it would cause him to develop enteritis, which is a small intestinal disease. As a result of this disease, he would become short and frail. This would be something that would hurt him while growing up. Essie was a very strange child, to be honest with you. In first grade, he would have this thing for both genders, and it's not what you're thinking of. It's something completely different. I'm not going to tell you now, but it's something that you're probably not expecting. Essie again was a strange, introverted kid that would never play sports, even though he was encouraged by both of his parents to play sports. But he would never find himself enjoying playing sports. But you would often find him in a library, sitting down reading a book, and slowly he would develop an interest in literature. Of course, when he told his parents that this was something that he was interested in, both of them agreed that yes, this could be something that could help further his life. And not long he would find himself moving to Kawazan Gakuen University to obtain a master's degree in English literature. There, a 24-year-old Essie would meet this Western girl that was a tall and blonde woman, and she was from Germany. The two would meet as she would live in the same apartment building as Essie's grandmother. And Essie, who was attracted to her, but didn't know she would have the same feelings towards him. So pretty scared of rejection, he would just keep it bottled inside of him. But anyways, one night he would find himself visiting this woman. He would reach to her apartment door, knock on it. He got no answer, so he would knock again. Still no answer. And so he would try the doorknob. Found the door was unlocked. Now thinking to himself, I'll just have a look inside to see if she's actually in the house, and if not, I'll just leave. So he walks into her apartment and begins to search for her, and he finds no sign that there was anyone in the apartment until he reaches to the bedroom. So he would walk up to the bedroom and slowly open the door so he can see a crack inside of the bedroom. And once he saw inside the bedroom, he would open the door and go to the edge of the bed, on where he would find that same German woman who was fast asleep. And that's when he would pull out a knife, and right before he could stab the woman in the head, he would move the dressing table hard enough so it made a loud noise and woke up this German woman. And that's when Essie would attack her, but now since she's awake, she would fight back. And since again Essie was a weak and frail guy, he would lose and actually run away. And you see, even though Essie did kind of know this woman, she didn't really know him like that. In fact, she really barely knew that he existed. She would see him through the hallways and would smile at him, but other than that, that was their communication. Essie was interested in this woman, but again, it's not what you think. The main reason he was interested in this woman was because of her thighs, which he thought would taste nice. So the next couple of days, Essie would plan an escape route so he could enter her apartment, kill her, and take some of her flesh. But of course, as you know, that plan would fail. Following this horrific attack, he would actually get arrested and would get charged for SA. But SA would never tell the police his true intentions, which I've just told you now, which kind of helped him to get out of this situation, because again, since his family had a lot of money, they would pay a settlement to the victim, and in return, SA's charges would be dropped, which of course would get accepted, and SA's criminal record would stay clean. This whole ordeal would anger and put a lot of stress on the family of SA, but somehow he would only get a slap on the wrist. But moving on to April 26, 1977, which just so happened to be the birthday of SA, he would find himself on a flight from Tokyo to France, to the main city of Paris. Why was he moving there? Because he wanted to complete a PhD in French literature at the Sorbonne University. And another reason for going to Paris was because the Japanese people thought that Paris was an amazing place, and many people of the Japanese citizens find themselves idolizing this city of Paris. And well, yes, Paris is a very amazing place. It's just not as amazing as how Japanese people describe it to be. And a lot of Japanese people that eventually go to Paris would find themselves disappointed as they began to see the true nature of Paris. But of course, nevertheless, Paris is the capital of France and is known for its amazing historical buildings and its beautiful architecture and its bustling streets, and of course the main thing, the Eiffel Tower. But it would be here in the capital of France where Essie would meet a Dutch woman by the name of Renée Hartevelt. Renée would also come to Paris to learn French literature at Sorbonne University. Renée, who was an attractive woman standing at 5'10", so almost a whole foot bigger than Essie. She had an interest in poetry, which was another reason why she came to Paris. But she was described as being a romantic at heart, with an infectious personality. She was well liked amongst her peers, and through their academic studies, Essie and Renée would slowly turn from classmates to casual friends. They would occasionally meet for coffees and help each other with lecture notes, but there was nothing more beyond that. Now, after some time of this cycle, Essie gained the trust of Renée, and the two would begin to have dinner at each other's apartments while also revising for the exam. And well, as his friendship with this beautiful woman became bigger, so did the dark desires of Essie. And Essie knew that he needed to give in to these horrible desires and go out and kill someone. And a while, he would bring random women into his apartment with the full intentions of killing them. But once he got the chance to pull the trigger on these women, he would freeze up. Now, whether being in Tokyo or Paris, Essie knew that he needed to somehow fulfill his desires. But every time that he got the chance, he would freeze up. So he kind of got himself into a roadblock. June 11th, 1981, Renee would get invited over by Essie. And well, wanting to do well in her studies, she would agree to do extra additional work with him. The main factor that she agreed to this was basically she missed some of the most important lessons of the semester. But of course, luckily she had Essie to help her catch up. So around about the evening time, she would arrive at Essie's front door, where the two would quickly sit down and begin the extra work. Now, the evening went quite uneventful until the dark thoughts kept looming around Essie. And now he's just staring at this innocent woman, Rennie, as she's just writing away. And again, he would find her attractive and would admire the way she lived her life. But of course, as you know, his interpretation of being attracted to someone isn't the same as me and you. You see, he wanted to consume her and absorb her energy because he thought that consuming her would provide him with good health and amazing beauty. So that's why he invited her over to his apartment so he can kill her. As Renee is working at the desk, which is located in the living room, Essie would slowly creep away to retrieve something. But just before he could leave her eyesight, Rennie would turn around and look at Essie and would ask him, "What are you doing?" Which he would respond by saying, "Oh, nothing, just getting dinner ready." Which Rennie thought, yeah, that's okay, and she continued to work. And this whole time, Rennie had no clue, nor would she even have a reason to suspect anything, because to her, Essie seemed like a normal guy. A bit weird, but normal, if that makes sense. But little did she know, a couple of minutes later, Essie would silently come behind Rennie, but this time with a rifle. Rennie, again with no clue, had her back against him, and she kind of began to sing her poetry to see how it sounds. And when she began, Essie would lift up his rifle, aim it at the back of Rennie's head, and as he got his finger over the trigger, doubt would begin to creep in, to the point where he'd actually almost move his finger off the trigger. But unfortunately, it would be this time where he would remove all his doubts and would pull the trigger. One shot, and once Rennie was dead, Essie would become very overwhelmed on what he's just done, to the point literally seconds after killing Rennie, he would faint. Once after some time, he would finally regain consciousness. He would get up and would look around at the mess that he's just created, but either way, he would still go through his plan, which was to consume Rennie. Once he was filled up, he would cut the rest of her body and put everything into his fridge. And now it was time for him to make up his cover plan. Now Essie would find himself with the dead body in his apartment, which by the way was in the middle of a busy city, so moving the body would prove quite difficult for Essie. Around 2 days of trying to figure out on how to get rid of this body, Essie would begin to realize that the smell from the corpse was becoming very overwhelming. That was mainly thanks to the hot weather that Paris was receiving. So kind of in a panic and knowing that he's running out of time, we go out and buy 2 large travel bags, and just after killing Rennie 2 days prior, he would dump his body inside of these bags before hailing for a taxi. The taxi would arrive around about 8 p.m. Essie, who again was frail and weak, would find himself struggling to lift the bags up onto the boot of the car, which then the driver saw that he was struggling and he would come back around and help him. But even he too, who was a normal man, would struggle to lift these bags up, to the point where he would kind of jokingly tell Essie that, "Hey, do you have a body in here or something? Why is it so heavy?" Essie would awkwardly laugh and would just say that, "Oh, it's just a lot of clothing," before heading inside of the cab. He would get the taxi to stop at this park, which was called the Bolgana, and within this park were several lakes, which Essie often visited. The park was known to be a nice place to walk and to relax and study as well. So being quite familiar with this place, Essie thought that this place would be a good place to get rid of his body. But to Essie's horror, when he opened the door as he was leaving the taxi, he saw that it was still broad daylight, and as he was looking around, he saw that there's still loads of people walking around, which isn't good for him at all, of course. But instead of going back to the apartment, he would accept that he would just have to wait. So with the bags unloaded, he would begin to walk into the park, where a lot of people would recall seeing him walk around. And now, as the sun is finally setting, the reality of his plan begins to set in for Essie. But he would get distracted by the beautiful sunset that was happening. So much so, he would actually leave his bag unattended, which was several feet away from him. And once he was done sightseeing, he would turn around and look at his bag. And to his horror, he would see there was a man poking at his bag. The stranger, while poking the suitcase, would turn and look at Essie and would ask him, "Is this yours?" Which surprisingly, Essie would say, "No, it's not." So then the stranger would look around to see if there's anyone nearby that would claim this bag, which obviously no one did. And so once he opened the bag, a woman nearby who was also watching this would begin to scream. S.A. would calmly walk away as a shocked crowd began to form these suitcases, and his opportunity to dispose of a body had miserably failed. Now, as he's walking away, the question of him getting caught would loom him, but this thought wouldn't last long, because he would find himself getting raided by the French authorities, and he would formally get charged with the murder of Rene. Surprisingly, when S.A. got caught, he would actually be relieved, because he could finally talk to someone about his feelings and his dark desires. As expected with cases that involved foreigners, a long legal process would begin. After murdering Rene and also admitting that he did kill her, S.A. would be held for 2 years to await for trial, and luckily for him, his wealthy father would throw in a lot of money for a good defense lawyer. But this trial would end as S.A. being legally insane and unfit to stand trial, and the judge ordered him to be indefinitely held in a French mental institution. And due to this story becoming somewhat famous, many news outlets would publicize the crimes of S.A., and as expected, the public would become outraged, because once they heard that he was going to be staying in one of their mental institutions, they got angry because the French public didn't want their taxes to go to him. Of course, following this national outcry to deport him, the government would comply. Therefore, S.A. would find himself back at Japan, and since he was unfit to stand for trial in the French law system, his murder charges were dropped. And since all of his charges were dropped, all court documentations which held information of his crime were both sealed away, therefore not legally allowed to be released to foreign authorities, which include in Japan. And unfortunately, this would really back Japan into a corner, since they had no robust case on S.A. and they had no choice to let him walk free. But he was checked into a psychiatrical hospital located in Tokyo, where he would be diagnosed with personality disorder. But on August 12, 1986, S.A. checked out of the hospital without getting any treatment at all, and ever since then he was a free man to walk wherever, whenever, with whoever he wants. And still to this day, he's a free man walking in the streets of Tokyo. One of our main characters in today's video is 29-year-old Johnny Cox and his wife 25-year-old Megan Cox. And even though when it came to their love and their relationship, it was really strong, but when it came to resisting drugs and just the overall drug life, even their love couldn't help them resist it. And so right from the get-go, life was pretty rough on them. And since slowly but surely their drug habits got worse and worse, and more frequent to be more exact, they would find themselves eventually homeless and in the streets begging for money. And again, going back to the point where they relied on drugs so much they couldn't even get a stable job, or in some cases when they did get a stable job, they wouldn't be able to keep it. And this would be bad, but it gets worse. The fact is that the couple had a kid, and of course, as I just described, they were in no shape or form to actually look after the kid. And so in December 2015, Child Protective Services would step in and would just tell the couple that, look, you guys aren't clearly well enough to look after this child, so unfortunately we're going to have to take them away from you. And well, you think they've hit rock bottom, but it gets worse unfortunately. Just a couple of days later, the married couple would get arrested due to the fact that they committed variable offences that were from their drug habits. Now sitting in a cell looking face first into a brick wall, Johnny and Megan knew that they needed to turn their life around, not just for them, forget about them, it was for their child. Because where they were in their life, it was just rock bottom. Not only could they not see the child, but they couldn't even walk freely anymore. So the two would spend some time in jail before ultimately being let out. As things are starting to turn around for the couple, they would get this once-in-a-lifetime chance from someone that Megan knew of. And this man was a very successful real estate investor, and his name was Todd Kellio. Excuse me if I butcher his second name. And the way him and Megan met was when Megan was a waitress at a local diner. And well, she would serve him all the time until they exchanged numbers. But I know some of you might be getting more ideas, but it was it from there. Nothing else happened. And so Todd would reach out to Megan and would say that, hey, I know you're going through some stuff, and well, just to help you out, I tell you what, I've got a job offer for you. And not only you, your husband as well can work for me. And well, when Johnny and Megan heard this news, they were ecstatic. And the best part was, they also were told that they were gonna get paid pretty well. And the main reason why Todd wanted these two, or just wanted workers in general, was because recently, Todd had purchased a massive 95-acre plot of land near the area where Johnny and Megan were. And well, he needed people to clean the property for him, because even though the land was massive, it hadn't really been touched in a while. And Todd had plans to develop this property. So again, he reached out to Megan, who was struggling for money. And of course, let's be honest, we all knew that they were going to say yes, because they were desperate for money. And the fact that these two, a couple of months ago, were not even looked as potential candidates for work, somehow got a job that would pay them a lot of cash. This was something that
felt too good to be true, and later on you'll know why. Now the day is December 19th of the same year, and it's the couple's first day of the job. And so on that day, Megan would wake up, go downstairs, and would tell her mother all about this job. And all her mother could do was just smile, because she knew how much this job meant to her daughter. Because not only for the money, it was the fact that she's finally changing her life around and actually putting her life back together. So after a nice conversation with her mother, Johnny and Megan would head out and would begin to head towards the property. The property itself, again, wasn't too far away from Megan and Johnny, so they would arrive pretty quickly. And right as they got in front of the main entrance of this property, they would be met with a fence with chains around it. And what was behind that fence seemed like a massive forest. And well, this was the 95-acre land that Todd had bought. And in the center of this land was a couple of buildings, which where Megan and Johnny needed to go, because they were responsible for cleaning that area up. And so Megan would follow this chain fence until there was a gap where she could fit a car through. When I mean gap, it's probably more for entrance way is the best way to describe it. And so they would drive through and would find themselves just going through a forest basically. And not long they would find themselves driving deep into the heart of the forest. And the couple at this point were in awe, just staring all around the place, because they couldn't fathom how someone could have this much money and buy this much land. Now for this story to have the what the heck effect, we're gonna have to skip a couple of days, specifically 3 days. And Megan's mother at this point had no contact with Megan for the last 3 days. And at first she was worried, but she kind of told herself that Megan must be busy. And even though she never got told, he thought that Megan must be staying over there because it was a big job. And so on the 3rd day, Megan's mother was pretty intrigued on what her daughter was doing. And so she decided to ring her daughter. Her daughter didn't pick up, and so she waited an hour or two before ultimately ringing her again. But again, she didn't pick up. And even though she was a bit worried, she wasn't that worried. She just told herself again that she must be busy, but eventually when her busyness stopped, she should call back. But a couple of more hours later would go by and still no call from Megan. So now Megan's mother's worried meters getting bigger and bigger, to the point where she would actually try to call Johnny, but again, Johnny wouldn't answer. So now Megan's mother's trying her best not to overreact as she's walking up and down her hallway, and pretty quickly trying not to overreact goes out the window as she begins to think of the worst possible outcomes, which mainly was the couple had relapsed and overdosed. And so after a couple of minutes of thinking, she would just drop everything and rush to Megan and Johnny's small house, where she wouldn't find the couple or any sign that the couple had been there over the last couple of days. Now a good feeling is screaming at her that something isn't right. For them to go completely off grid and not tell her about anything makes no sense whatsoever. And with only one option left, she decides to call the police. But due to the couple's past, the police didn't really take it seriously and would just tell Megan's mother that they'll just turn up a couple of days, just give them some time. But Megan's mother was adamant that this was something more than that, and it can actually be very fateful. And this was enough to convince the police to start actually investigating. The police would start this investigation by asking the owners of the property that the two said they were going to work in. And of course, you know, that man was Todd. And since he was the owner of the property, and he was probably the last person to see them before they ultimately vanished. And at first, Todd was a bit defensive and would tell the police saying that I have no idea where they went. But when the police kept pushing Todd for more answers, he would just snap. I would just start shouting, saying I have no idea what happened to them. But eventually he would quickly calm down and would apologize to the police as he doesn't like being accused. He would go on to say that I had limited interactions with them. He would also go on to say that when they arrived on my property, all they did was clean my property as I asked them to do. And once they cleaned my property, I paid them and they went. And since then, we haven't been in contact. And so the police, even though they were very suspicious on the way Todd was acting, would just decide to wait it out and see if the couple would reappear from what they thought was most likely another relapse that they ultimately went through with the money that they made. And to be fair, that was their only option as they couldn't do anything else. So a couple of more days would go by ever since that talk with Todd. Unfortunately, the couple would not return to their home, and still no one had no idea on where these two could be. And things would stay the same for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and at this point the case was becoming more colder and colder by the day. But something would change on August 31st, 2016, so a whole 8 months after their disappearance. There were 2 more people in the local area that went missing, and these 2 were a couple. One of their names was Kayla Brown, who was a 30-year-old woman, and her boyfriend, 32-year-old Charlie Carver. And even though these 2 were a couple, they haven't really been dating for long, but it wouldn't really stop them from becoming very serious with each other. Because Charlie, even though their relationship was in the early stages, he would introduce Kayla to his family, which for Charlie was a big achievement. But unlike the other couple, the Coxies, these 2 were nowhere near in the financial difficulties that they were going through. Charlie had a full-time job operating a printer at a local business. Kayla made a living by doing odd jobs around the town. And to their families, it seemed like they were very happy in the direction that they were going in life. And I just felt like nothing could go wrong in their lives. But if you watch my videos for long enough, you do know that something does go wrong. And it starts on the August 31st, when Kayla and Charlie stopped returning messages or answering their phone calls. Everyone in both families were worried, but it would be Charlie's father who was extremely worried, as he and his son Charlie were very close with each other. And Charlie's father knew that if Charlie didn't answer his phone, he could always expect Charlie to phone him back later when he was free. But Charlie never, and for that reason Charlie's father was extremely worried, because this was something so out of character for Charlie. And this would also give the fact that whatever was going on with Charlie wasn't good at all. But even though with that state of mind, he remained optimistic that he would get a phone call or even a text message at least. But the next couple of days would go by and still Charlie's father would not get a phone call or even a text message. And again, this was the same for Kayla as well, and Charlie's father was so worried to the point that he actually would go to Charlie's house to actually see if Charlie was in their house. And when he got there, he saw the house was all turned off, and overall gave him the vibe that no one had been living there for the last couple of days. And while Charlie's father wouldn't stop there, he would drive to Kayla's house, and the same went for Kayla as well. She wasn't there, and the house looked like no one had been living there for the last couple of days. With literally no idea on what to do, Charlie's father decided that I'm gonna have to call the police. And so that's exactly what he did, and the police were involved. The police at first had no idea where to start, since they had no leads due to the sudden disappearance. But they would finally start by interviewing Charlie and Kayla's friends and family. But everyone would have the same answer: they had no idea where they went. At first, when Kayla and Charlie's friends got told that they were missing, they told the police that they thought the couple were going on a trip or a holiday. But again, when the police told them that they were missing, they began to get really worried. And well, unfortunately for the next 2 months, nothing would happen, as the police had no idea what to do or where to look. But just as everyone was beginning to lose hope on where these two went, the police would finally get a search warrant that would allow them to look at their respective phone call records. So to start with, they would check Kayla's phone, and they were able to locate roughly where her last location was. And well, from the pings that her phone was given off from a nearby phone tower, the police discovered that it was in the same 95 acres of land that the Coxies had been in before they went missing. With no hesitation, the police put a search warrant to go search this land. So as they waited for this search warrant to be cleared, the police would send out a team to the entrance of this land where the Coxies went through. So as soon as the warrant gets cleared, they can just bust through. But for some reason, this warrant was taking a while to get cleared. So another set of officers would go to the owner of this land, Todd's house, which at the time was about 20 minutes away from the actual property. And so the police would arrive at the front door, knock on it, and as soon as he opened the front door, his face was shocked because he was not expecting the police at his front door. So the police would lay everything down, would just tell Todd everything that they found. And Todd knew that this looked unbelievably suspicious. For a couple to go into his property and just vanish all of a sudden made Todd look very bad, which he knew. But he would calmly say, I know how this looks, but trust me when I say this, I have no idea where they went. I hired Kayla and her boyfriend came along. They both went onto my property to do some cleaning for me. And as soon as they were done with their job, I paid them and they left. That's all the interactions that we had. So the fact that her last known location's inside my property, I have no idea, and I have nothing to tell you, because I just don't know. And it was at this point the police officers outside of Todd's land got their search warrant cleared, and so they would head inside to this property and they would make their way to the last known location of Kayla. And it wasn't long before they found a clearing, and so they began to drive forward into this clearing as the trees on the side became closer and closer. When they got to this clearing, they noticed that there was 2 green buildings. The left of these buildings looked kind of like a shed that specifically you would keep your tools in, but the right of this shed was a massive green container that had all these metal chains wrapped around it. On top of that, 5 padlocks to keep the door shut. And I know what you're thinking, you're presuming that Kayla's in there, which was also the police's thought. But before they opened the big container, they went into the shed to see if there was anything there, which unfortunately wasn't the case. All there was inside was just gardening tools. So that left that big container, which again was wrapped around with metal chains. The police knew that they needed to bring heavy equipment, so they brought out their metal cutting saw and also their bolt cutters. And so they began to cut into these bolts and chains. And finally, when they opened the door up, they were gobsmacked on what they saw.
Watch out, y'all move. I got it, watch out, boss.
Hey, Joey. Joey.
Sheriff's officer.
Sheriff's officer. I need to
What?
grab that
Back
camera,
up there,
get
buddy.
Just one. Are you okay?
Grab what? Go.
Do you have any weapons? Coming through, okay?
What's your name?
What's your name, man?
Lauren. Okay. All right.
Just a girl.
Just a girl. Just a girl. How are you, honey?
We're bolt cutters.
This is our best. He's a paramedic.
The police had finally found Kayla and she was in rough shape. She was also bound with metal chains wrapped around her neck and her mouth, which those chains were anchored to the wall. Also, she was handcuffed, but thankfully still alive. And when eventually the police finally freed her from this container, she would tell them everything that happened, which starts on August 31st, 2016. So the same day Charlie's father would notice that he wasn't getting any responses from his son. That day Kayla would receive a text from one of her good friends, Todd. And just like the Coxies, he would ask her that, hey, I was looking for some people to come out to my new property that I've just bought, because I'm looking to clean it and get it ready for development. And Kayla, who was looking for some work, would agree to it. And once their conversation was done, she would tell Charlie all about this new job. And once Charlie heard about this, he would ask Kayla, can I come along? And at first Kayla said no, because he's not going to pay you. But then Charlie said he doesn't even need to pay me. And so Kayla, totally thrilled, said yes, you need to come along with me then. And this would be good for spending time with each other and also making some money. So later that day, she and Charlie would head out to the property and they would reach to the entrance of the property and they would just drive through. And again, they would drive through this long access road all the way until they got to the clearing. And once they got to the clearing, they could see Todd, who was just standing there waving at them. And when the couple got out of the car, they saw Todd just standing there in front of these green buildings. And so now the couple parked up and began to walk towards Todd to greet him. And as they were walking towards Todd, it wouldn't be long before Todd would just whip out a pistol and shoot Charlie 3 times in the chest. And as soon as Charlie fell to the ground, Todd would point the gun at Kayla and would menacingly just tell her that if you go anywhere or try anything, I'll kill you. And not just you either, I'll kill your entire family. And then he proceeded to put the gun away and would walk over to Charlie's lifeless body and would wrap him in blue top and then would carry him and dump him in a nearby bucket of tractor. Once he was done with that, he would walk back to Kayla, who was just standing there in disbelief on what was going on, and also so terrified that she couldn't even move even if she wanted to. And once he got close enough, he would pull out his gun once again and ordered Kayla to go inside the shipping container. And so with no option left, Kayla would do as she was told. She would go inside, and once she was inside, Todd would lock her up. And that's how it was for the next 65 days. Kayla had essentially just become into a prisoner. Todd would come once or twice a day and would just do whatever he wanted to Kayla, and told her every time that if she tries to resist, he'll kill her entire family. So Kayla, thinking about her family, wouldn't try anything and just kind of accepted that this is her life. And she knew that once Todd was sick of her, he was just gonna kill her anyway, but at least her family was gonna be safe. But when that day came when the police busted through the property and opened the container, Kayla couldn't believe it, because Kayla well and truly believed that she was gonna die in that container. When Kayla explained everything to the police, a radio got sent out to the other squad that was interviewing Todd. And obviously in that radio everything was told about what they found. And they were told also to arrest Todd, obviously. When Todd found out that Kayla was found, and also the fact that she told the truth of what happened, his face said 1,000 different words, but thankfully there's a video of it.
We have Kayla in your property. She was locked in a container, okay? She has told us that you shot and killed Charlie. Why did you shoot him?
I didn't shoot anybody, sir.
Okay, why did you lock her in a container in your property?
I don't stop.
She's on your property right now, locked in a container. She's saying you buried Charlie's body on that property.
No, sir.
So you're saying you didn't lock her up, you didn't put her in the Connex box or anything?
No, sir. I'm money an attorney.
Probably a good thing. Go ahead and put him in the back of your...
Todd, surprisingly, despite the overwhelming evidence against him, would still deny this fact. But eventually he would confess not just kidnapping Kayla, but also killing 3 people, which were Johnny and Megan Coxey, and also Kayla's boyfriend. And he would go on to say that with Johnny and Megan, he would do the same strategy as he did with Kayla. He would lure the Coxies into his property on the promise of work, and when they reached these green buildings, he would pull out a gun and would shoot Johnny. And just like Kayla, he would order Megan to go into the shipping container. But the difference was with Megan. Unlike Kayla, Megan would actually try to run away from Todd, and when she finally got captured again, she would resist Todd and would just do everything that Todd didn't want, which in about 5 days Todd would have enough and would just kill her. Todd would go on to describe Megan as a wild animal, and he would say that I had to put a bullet in that wild animal. And the tone that he said these words in was so casual, like he just didn't care, or he just didn't understand, he just took people's lives away from them. A bit more searching later, the police would find Megan and Johnny's body. Their bodies would be discovered in shallow graves that were made for them, right outside the shipping container. At this rate, Todd knew that he was going to receive the death penalty. So in a last-ditch effort to escape this fate, he would confess to even more murders. And if he confessed to these murders, the police would take away the death penalty from him, which obviously they agreed to. And so Todd would go on to say in 2003, he had walked into this motorbike shop and killed 4 of their staff members, who apparently a couple of days earlier, they had offended him in some way. It is believed all they were doing was joking around with him by saying Todd's motorbike skills wasn't good enough. And of course, to me and you, this is just a light joke, but Todd didn't see it like that. And in fact, that light joke got him very offended, to the point in open broad daylight he would shoot all 4 of them dead. And the worst part was when he was telling the story to the police, he seemed pretty proud. And also he would go on to brag about the way he killed these people. It was almost like he was some sort of professional hitman. Now even though these murders were enough for the police to take away the death penalty away from Todd, the police believed that Todd had killed more people. And well, during her captivity, and the fact that Todd was so confident that Kayla wasn't getting out, he told Kayla that he had a killing streak going on, and how his body count was in the high double digits. But since he didn't need to tell the police that, he didn't. And so we don't really know if he actually did kill that many people or he didn't. But let's be honest, we probably did. Another disturbing and quite well known fact is, when Todd was announced to the world as a killer, an anonymous account was doing all these product reviews on Amazon. And this anonymous account was Todd. And the products that he was reviewing were things like knives, shovels, chainsaws. And the reviews were talking about how he was going to use these products to kill people, or how he was going to use these products to dispose of bodies. Todd would ultimately get sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences, which practically means he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. And thus was the story of Todd, also known as the Amazon review killer. Our main protagonist is called Trey Sessler, and well, Trey was born in a place called Waller County. Waller was located in Texas, and on the early mornings of August 3rd, 1989, a young Sessler was born. His mother, who was called Rhonda, and his father, who was called Lawton, would have another child prior to Trey, and his name was Mark. The life of Trey was pretty box standard, to say the least. He would get a nice American upbringing, and his family would never get into financial difficulties, or any other sort of difficulties. His parents were hard-working citizens for Waller County. His father would work in the schooling industry. While his sons were growing up, he would spend most of his time working at Robertson Elementary, and his hard work would pay off and he would become a very well-respected teacher. And of course, his experience in the industry did help. His mother at first would choose not to work, but after a while she decided that it's probably time to get a job, and that's where she would get the job at the local newspapers. And quickly her fellow co-workers would describe her as a precise wordsmith with a very contagious laugh. The couple had been married for 34 years in total. Trey's school life was again pretty average, as well as he never had any problems with other school kids, so he never got into fights or made any enemies, and that was mainly due to the fact that he was a shy kid, and when he spoke words they were very limited. But of course again, that meant he would never get bullied, but also he would never make many friends. But even though from the outside he seemed like a normal kid, but it was on the inside where he became strange, and this strange version of himself would begin to leak out while he was in a conversation with his teacher. And after this conversation, his teacher would become more concerned about Trey and eventually would let his parents know. Now moving on to when Trey turned 13, it was a dark, gloomy evening, and well, Trey would get the devious plan to call 911 and complain of a suspicious shadow that he kept seeing outside of his parents' house. And of course this was not true. His real intentions were, when the officer came out to investigate, he would plant himself in the woods across the house with a small baseball bat, and when the officer wasn't looking, he would run and bash the officer in the head. Then he would want to steal the officer's firearm and then drive to his friend's house. Thankfully that would never happen. As Trey was running towards the officer would turn around and catch him. This action would land him in the psychiatric ward, where he would be evaluated by a psychiatrist. Nothing that would be any evident would come out from this incident, and so this was eventually dropped by both police and psychiatrists. Trey of course would begin to to grow up into his teenage years, and nothing like that would ever happen. And it just seemed like Trey had returned to being his normal self. So the plan that he did a couple of years ago against that officer would become into a sheer coincidence and a mistake in his family's eyes. But during this growing up period, Trey would find himself falling in love with filmmaking, and so he would watch many movies as his source of inspiration. And with the fact that his family had bought him a new laptop, he would delve himself into the internet world. And so in September of 2006, he would discover a website that you're probably watching this video on today, called YouTube. Once he discovered that on YouTube you can create videos and share them to a lot of people, he wouldn't waste any time making his own channel and then his own video. His channel was called Lens Caps Productions. Once he made his channel, he would begin to sit behind his computer for many hours at a time, editing videos, and pretty quickly he began to upload many videos onto his channel. The videos that Trey first posted were short films, bloopers, and just generally videos for Trey. But as he created more and more videos, he would begin to incorporate his mother, father, and his brother. As Trey began to discover more of the world of film, he would also discover anime. And if you don't know what anime is, it's basically a Japanese style animation that quickly took rise all over the world. So in late 2006, almost a year when he first started his YouTube channel, Trey would decide to switch up his content style, and he would also change his name to Mr. Anime. This new part of Trey's YouTube life would focus on reviewing different movies and series of anime that he watched. From the get-go, viewers that watched Mr. Anime saw that he was a straightforward and honest guy. This style of content would definitely be opposite of many other YouTubers in this space, but this wouldn't be a bad thing. This would actually be a good thing, because this would give him his own uniqueness. Every review that he would do on anime, his viewers would know that there's no sugarcoating or any bias here at all. It's just straight facts. And well, for this reason, his channel would explode in 2011, and he would gain up to 1 million viewers. And of course, this is still in the early stages of YouTube, and this was massive. And by 2011, Trey would have uploaded up to 300 videos on YouTube. But weirdly, the more videos that Trey uploaded, the darker his content would become. It would be in between his former video reviews, where he would often do funny comedy stints to break away from his normal reviewing content, which his reviewing content was pretty repetitive. And eventually these break videos would become more disturbing than funny. Trey would find his third love besides anime and video making. And what was that third love? It was guns. And he would discover this passion while watching gun videos on YouTube. He would go on to buy dozens and also sell dozens of them over the next couple of years. And he would also incorporate firearms into his videos. He would start by making skits that would have him using firearms, and eventually turning those short videos into full demonstration videos at an unlawful range or a random building. Although as YouTube from 2010 to 2012 very openly endorsed firearms, there was no cause of concern found in his community. Everyone thought that what Trey was doing was okay. Trey would often condemn gun violence many times as he was talking to the camera. Even though Trey was a strange character that would gain a lot of attention on the internet and would essentially become a mini celebrity on YouTube, his home life was unfortunately not the same at all. The things that Trey would fantasize as a child would never leave him as an adult, but instead of showing them like he did as a child, he would just learn to not share any of this and keep it to himself. For most of 2011, Trey was living by himself in his grandmother's home in Hempstead, because unfortunately she had recently passed away, and so he was safeguarding the house for the foreseeable future. And it was this isolation that would lead Trey to start plotting and scheming his plan to cause harm to others. And at first these things were small, but again, being alone meant that he could fully delve into these urges, and these urges would become bigger and bigger the longer he stayed by himself. And not only would these urges get bigger, they would become more sophisticated and of course more dangerous. And during this alone time, he would also be fascinated in historic school shooters and killers. And one of them was the notorious killer Ted Bundy. And this would lead him to formulate a plan on how he could do the most damage as he possibly could. It got to the point where he had downloaded satellite images of Waller High School, which was his former high school, and he would construct a path where he could ram his car through a gate and courtyard. And once he was in the school, he would get out of his his car and claim as many victims as he could with his own .22 rifle. And also during this time, rumors began to circulate online about Trey apparently using live animals, including his own pet rabbit, as firing targets. And even though YouTube had no effect on Trey or his mental health, it did offer a window for others to see what was going on with Trey, and fans could notice that Mr. Anime was becoming more and more erratic, and where once videos were coherent and were well thought out, were now becoming more harder to follow and much more difficult to understand. Another thing that really didn't help Trey was his relationship with his father, because their relationship was becoming worse. Around Christmas time in 2011, he would share to his friends that he was planning to kill his father. And why was he planning to do this? Well, his father, who had become very upset with Trey for leaving college and giving up, this would give Trey a signal that his father had just written him off, as he was a crazy, unstable son that was not going to do much with his own life. And of course, this perception of Trey would be false to his father, but he wouldn't know that Trey had this feeling. And this would also be another reason why Trey would live at his grandmother's house. And of course, since Trey was alone, his father and brother would regularly and go check up on Trey. And unfortunately, every time he would go visit Trey, they would always find alcohol in his home. And this would start a big fight between the three. But unfortunately, at the end, nothing would be resolved. And since after this fight, Trey's drinking habits would become more and more frequent and more heavy. And on March 19th, 2012, after a long session of just non-stop drinking, all the way through to the 20th, Trey would stay up all night thinking about his urges. And unfortunately, these urges would become to reality, mainly thanks to the amount of alcohol he had intaked. And in the early hours of March 20th, Trey would return to his family home, fully armed. And of course, none of his family was expecting him. A couple of hours later, a call was made to the local police about the Sessler's home. The caller had said apparently they had heard unexpected noises coming from the property, so could you check it out? And of course, pretty quickly officers were sent out to that property, and the officers knew that something was wrong as they got to the door. But either way, they would both begin to knock on the door, but they wouldn't get an answer, so they would knock again but still get no answer. But instead of leaving, they would begin to go around the perimeter of the property and would begin to look through the windows to see if anyone was inside. And it was at this point one of the officers would come rushing to the other officer, shouting that there's two deceased people. They were Rhoda, Lawton and Mark. All of them would be found with gunshot wounds. The home itself was a total mess, from the top to the bottom, with rifle casings scattered all over the house. There were broken glass in every room, and carvings were found all over the walls. And one of them walls had a confession, such as, "Why did I do this? I love my mum and dad and brother. God forgive me because I can't forgive myself." The police at this point had no idea that it was Trey that did this. But to their horror, Trey had packed over 100 ammunition rounds along with his rifle and would drive to Waller High School, which again was his old school. And at first he would sit in the car contemplating if he should go through this plan. And thankfully he would convince himself that this wasn't a good idea. And at this point the police were in a full force search for Trey, and thankfully they would find him at a local's friend's house in Magnolia, and they would know that he was the one that did this gruesome act because of the more confessions that he had wrote on his parents' wall. While interrogated, he would tell the officers that the reason that he had took his entire family's life was so that they wouldn't have to endure the pain and shame following his actions. The other details to the case I couldn't really find. All I read was many quotes from his friends and fans saying that we knew he was interested in gun violence when it came to video games, but we never knew he was capable of this. On a cold November 3rd, 1983, a girl by the name of Suzanne was born into this world, and right from the get-go, her father, Albert, and her mother, Marisa, would cherish every moment that they had with her, and it did help that her family were very well off, and they lived in Brazil in a city called Sao Paulo, which the city was known for people that were quite rich, and so they would buy a small, but for us regular people, a massive mansion, and reportedly it was around about 600,000 USD. The house itself is what you expect from a massive mansion. It had a swimming pool, multiple bedrooms, and also many office rooms. Now of course, you might be wondering where did this money come from? And a lot of it did come from Albert, as he was a very talented engineer and the director of Desert, which was a state-owned company that built all the highways in Sao Paulo, and also they built all the road systems. And since he was a director of this company, this would lead to him making a massive fortune. But his wife Marisa would also work too. She would work as a psychiatrist in the local area, and she too would make good money. family, but it was ultimately known that the father was the breadwinner. The two would meet in the University of Sao Paulo while they were studying for civil engineering, and well, when the two first saw each other, it's what you call love at first sight. Now, after Susan was born 4 years after her birth, the family would give birth to another child named Andreas, and he and his sister would become the bestest of friends. And of course, they were siblings, so it did help. And of course, again, since their parents were so wealthy, their childhood would be amazing. And some might say unfortunately, and some might say fortunately, they would rarely ever face hardships. And when it came time for school, the two would go to the best of the best schools. So, of course, it wouldn't take long before the two became very gifted academics. During school, Susan would be one of them shy, quiet girls that would rarely make conversation with her classmates unless she was being spoke to. And of course, when it came to participating in classes, like answering questions, you would never see her put herself forward to answer. And naturally, due to her quiet demeanor, she wouldn't really make many friends. But she would make a few, which was good enough for Suzanne. But throughout school, Suzanne would always be the top of her class. And just before graduating, she would learn up to 3 different languages, something that no one ever does. But once she graduated, she would head to the Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo, and she would go there to study law, as she found out that that was her passion. And when she got the opportunity to study law, she took that opportunity without skipping a heartbeat. Now, even though she did have a passion for law, another reason that kept Susan quite dedicated on her studies was a simple fact that since her parents were so rich, and to be more specific, the entire net worth of the family is around about 17 million. And not only did she not have to pay for any of her schooling, she would also get a promise from her father that once she was done with school, he would give Suzanne a $10 million account that was already in her name and was waiting to be collected by her, but only if she finished school. But unfortunately, as many true crime stories go, it's not as simple as that. The summer of 2002, where things would change for Suzanne, as she would begin to start having more problems with her parents. Suzanne, who was 18 at this point, and since she was grown up, her interest into the opposite gender grew. And there was at one point where the family would attend a model aircraft fair a couple of years ago. And the reason why they attended this was basically because of Suzanne's brother, Andreas. And he was growing interest into model aircrafts. And so, as a surprise, his father would take him to a fair all about aircrafts. But this would be something that Suzanne's father could never have expected, not from a parent's perspective anyways. While at this show, Andreas would meet a guy by the name of Daniel, who was a bit of an expert at aircrafts. And since he was an expert, him and Andreas would get along very quickly, and they would become friends due to their passions. How they met was a bit unknown, but one thing's for sure, both of them loved model aircrafts. But when it came time for the family to leave, Andreas would beg his parents to pay Daniel to teach him more about model aircrafts. And since Andreas's parents could see that their son had a massive passion for model aircrafts, they said why not. And so over the next coming weeks, Daniel would come over to Andreas's house and teach Andreas all about aircrafts. But it was during this time visiting, he would grab the attention of a very familiar face, aka Suzanne. Side note, Daniel and Suzanne had met each other, but it's unclear where they met each other. But when the two rekindled, they would immediately fall in love with each other. The two were what you call the opposites, well, at least when it came to growing up. And of course, as you know, Suzanne had a very easy upbringing, but when it came to Daniel, it was pretty much the opposite. He would come from a very poor family that, unlike Suzanne's family, would struggle to put food on the table. Daniel and his brother would work at the local garage, and unfortunately, it wasn't because they wanted to do this, it was because they had to do it, because the family just needed more money. This would also come with the cost of their education, as when they started working, they couldn't even finish high school. But despite his hardships and his overall demeanor, it would be his rebellious attitude that would intrigue Suzanne. When the couple first got with each other, Suzanne didn't know how her parents would react to this information, so in fear she would just keep this relationship a secret. But as the months go by, Suzanne's behavior would become more suspicious for her parents, thus making them follow her one day as she left her house. And that's when they found out about the whole relationship with Daniel. So when eventually Suzanne came back home, she would be confronted by her parents, and since she was backed into a corner, she would confess everything. But to her surprise, her parents weren't too bothered at first anyways. They just told her that you should have just told us earlier, which that would have saved us from following you and making such a big hassle. But like I said before, once they found out about the type of person Daniel was, they would quickly change their mind. And the main reason why the parents would change their mind on Daniel, it wasn't because of the fact that he struggled growing up and is still struggling technically. It was the fact that he would lie to them about going into law school, and also lie about him still building model aeroplanes. And Suzanne's parents, being parents, would find out about all the lies Daniel had told them. It was unclear how they found out, but they had found out anyways. The other massive problem that they had with Daniel was the fact that since he had given up law school and his aeroplane building, he turned to smoking marijuana. And it wasn't just sometimes, it was practically every time, to the point he became dependent on it. And when he didn't smoke, he became paranoid and very hazy. And since both of Suzanne's parents were her parents, they wanted the best for Suzanne. So when they found out that Daniel wasn't going to be someone that helps her go forward in life, and also the fact that he was going to bring her down and make her like him, they told Suzanne that there was no way you can see him ever again. At first, Suzanne would listen and would not go to visit Daniel, but it would turn out that that was a lie. And the reason the parents did not find out about this was Suzanne's brother would always cover her back, and every time she left the house to go visit Daniel, he would make excuses on her behalf and where she was going. So another couple of weeks would go by and Suzanne's parents still don't know that Suzanne was still seeing Daniel. But they would one day sit Suzanne down, and her brother as well, and told them that they were going on a 1-month holiday around Europe. And they would both look at Suzanne and would tell her that this is your opportunity to show us that you're mature enough, and if you do show us that, we'll reward you. So the next couple of days would go by and Suzanne's parents left the country, but Suzanne, instead of being the responsible girl that her parents were hoping for, she would essentially just invite Daniel over and basically letting him move in with her. And of course, when he got this invitation, he was always going to accept it. And for the next month, the two would just sit around the house intoxicated with either marijuana or alcohol or other various drugs. A month would go by and Suzanne's parents would come back from the holiday, and they could instantly see that their house was a mess. There was alcohol bottles everywhere, the smell of marijuana was all over the house, and just basically the whole house was a tip. And it wouldn't really take a genius to figure out that Suzanne had brought Daniel over to the house, and this in turn would start a massive shouting match between Suzanne and her parents. But even though the first screaming match would end and both parties still upset with each other, over the next couple of weeks that would still continue, and every argument that would occur, the more desperate Suzanne would become, even to the point where she would ask her father that if he could buy her an apartment so she and Daniel could live there happily ever after. And of course her father would scream at her, do what you want, but don't expect me to pay for it, which of course angered Suzanne because she expected her father to do it, as all of her life that's what's been going on. And so seeing that there's nothing much she could do now, Suzanne in a defeated voice would tell her parents that, fine, I won't see him anymore. But if you learned anything from this video, you'll know that that was a lie, and she was still dating Daniel. But still obsessed, she would tell herself she's going to do anything in her power to stay with Daniel. November 1st, 2002 was a day like any other day. It was an early morning and Suzanne and her brother had just came back from sneaking out earlier in the night. And of course, since they sneaked out, there was no way they were going in through the front door, and so they would climb up and go through a window that they left open. But as soon as they walked into the house, they could see that there was a blood trail leading upstairs. So following this trail upstairs, it would lead them into their parents' bedroom. And as they got to the parents' bedroom, both of them would look at each other with a horrified face. And as they slowly opened the door, once the door was fully open, all the neighbors would have heard was a blood-curdling scream. And why were they screaming? Because they had just walked into their parents' deceased bodies. The police were called in, and quickly they found that some of the rooms in the house were completely in a tip, but some other places in the house was just completely fine. The rooms that were in a tip just looked like a robbery that went wrong. And when they got to the crime scene, aka the parents' bedroom, they saw both parents with savage scar marks all over them. And from what the police could tell, whoever did this used multiple weapons, because there was multiple scars all over the parents' bodies, from strangulation marks to knife marks, and whoever did this left the parents almost unrecognizable. The police would also find a suitcase that had been ripped open, and inside was money that had been taken. But as the detective came in and began to search around the property, they noticed that the alarm system that was in the house failed to go off, and if it had gone off, the guards around the residence would have been alerted and potentially saved the two. But they didn't go off, and in fact they found out that it had been disarmed, so whoever did this knew the code, which really grew suspicion on who could have done such a thing. Another weird thing was there was no sign of forced entry, there was no electronics stolen, and even though the main rooms such as the bedroom and the office room were in a complete tip, mostly the full house was pretty clean. So with nothing really left as evidence, the police would actually begin to ask the children some questions. First Andreas, who was actually just crying uncontrollably, accompanied with struggling to breathe. They would try to question him and try to get some answers out of him, but since he was crying so much, they couldn't. And so since they knew that they weren't getting anything out of him, they would go to Suzanne, who for a girl that had just lost both parents seemed pretty calm. But either way, they would just continue to ask her some questions. And it was there that they found out about Suzanne and her brother leaving the house last night. So naturally curious, they would ask them on what they did. And it would go Suzanne and her brother left the house at around about 9 p.m. And the main reason her brother was going out because he got invited to attend a party. And so Suzanne, being the big sister, she would go drop him off. And so once dropped off, Suzanne would leave and go do her other nightly activities, aka get in a motel with Daniel. The both would meet up back at around about 4 a.m. where they would head home because their parents would always wake up bright and early. So they made sure that they're getting home nice and early so they wouldn't get caught. And as you know, once they got home, they would discover their deceased parents. But this is where things would mess up for Suzanne. You see, when finally her brother, Andreas, was fit enough and was able to talk, the police would question him, and the answers that he gave to the police contradicted Suzanne's answers. For example, Suzanne told the police that her and Daniel were a happy couple accepted by her parents. But of course, as you know, that was not the case. The police at first would not try to pry into anything more, as they wanted both siblings to attend their parents' funeral, which was on November 2nd. But after the funeral, many rumours came out about Suzanne. For example, how still and uninterested she was during the funeral, and every time she would cry in the funeral, it just seemed forced. But another rumour that came out was just a couple of days after her parents' death, Suzanne would host a pool party. But even though these were all rumours, the police were still suspicious with Suzanne. But the one thing that really tipped the police over the edge was an anonymous tip that the police had received. And well, the person would tell the police that a man had just bought a motorbike, a very expensive one. But the weird part was, the person that paid for this motorbike paid the bike in full with $100 bills. But the main information about this whole tip was, the person that bought the motorbike was Daniel. And as we know, and the people close to Daniel, they knew that there was no way Daniel had the money for that. As well, they were just too poor to buy such an expensive motorbike without assistance from someone. And once they heard this, they would take Daniel's brother in for questioning. And although the journey towards the police station, Daniel's brother would act tough and would give out this unwavering confidence. But as soon as the police sat him down and would really begin to pressure Daniel's brother to speak, he would essentially just crack. Daniel's brother would admit to killing both of Suzanne's parents. And the worst part was, Daniel and Suzanne would help him. And of course, when this confession came out, the couple would get arrested. And right away, the two would give conflicting statements. Daniel would tell the police that the only reason that they did this was for the money. But to their surprise, when they asked Suzanne about it, Suzanne would say money had nothing to do with this. So the police, confused and with the fact that Suzanne would begin to cry and would just begin to blame Daniel and would make the whole situation into his fault, would actually be let out until the trial started, which by the way wasn't 4 years. And in that time, she would go to many different local stations and would just basically act like a woman that was in the middle of a crossfire and that had been used. But there's a slight but though. Even though this would improve her image as an innocent woman, there was a certain footage that the camera picked up of Suzanne's lawyers pointing and showing on where to cry and where to act vulnerable. And when this came out, this would prove to the whole community that all those previous interviews were a big lie and everything that she did and done was genuinely fake and just made her a disingenuous person. And of course, the police would get wind of this behaviour and would rearrest Suzanne. And this time, instead of feeling sorry for her, they would give her the same treatment as they did with Daniel. And after a couple of hours, she would crack and would reveal everything. On the late hours of November 1st was when this first started. Both Suzanne's parents were fast asleep quite early, since it was a Thursday and the parents had been working really hard. It was around about 9 p.m. when Suzanne and her brother would sneak out from the house. Her brother Andreas would think that this was some sort of innocent sneak out that they do all the time, but little did he know that this was much more worse than that. When Suzanne dropped her brother off at the party that he was attending to, she would go home, but not alone though. She would be accompanied by Daniel and his brother. Now the family's security guard did see Suzanne coming into the home, but they didn't see Daniel or his brother, so they let her through. Suzanne would park up but tell the brothers to stay in the car, and then she would go through the front door, walk up straight upstairs to her parents' bedroom where she would open the door and check if her parents were still asleep. And of course they were. And when she found out that they were still asleep, she would go and turn off the security alarm system. Once the system was off, she would tell Daniel and his brother to come inside. And as the brothers got into the house, the three would go into the living room where they would put on gloves and hoodies. But even though Suzanne didn't put a glove on, she would put a black hoodie on, as she intended to sit on an expensive couch as she watched Daniel and her brother go upstairs. parents with iron crowbars, and a couple of seconds later Suzanne could hear the brothers profusively beating her parents up with them same iron crowbars. But to the brothers' horror, no matter how many times they would bash the parents, they just wouldn't die. This is where the brothers would begin to panic, and one of the brothers would head into the bathroom and would get a towel and would wrap it around Suzanne's father, which managed to take his life. But somehow her mother Marisa was still alive. So in a last-ditch effort, Daniel would look around the bedroom and saw that there was a plastic bag, and well, in the most soulless way possible, he would put the bag over her head and just strangle her to death. The three would begin to set the stage in the house, so it looked like there had been a burglary. For example, they would spread office papers all over the office, and they would open many different drawers, but they did not forget to take as much money as possible. Once they were satisfied, they would head out, and in an attempt to create an alibi, they would drop off Daniel's younger brother at a fast food restaurant, and he would sit there where the cameras could pick him up, and well, Daniel and Suzanne would go to a motel and spend the night there. And as you know, Suzanne would pick her brother up nice and early, and they would arrive back at home, and as they climbed through the window, Suzanne knew that both of her parents were deceased, and she would just pretend to be shocked, again, even though she staged the full thing. And the sad part was, her brother had no idea that her sister could do that, and as you know, Suzanne would do her best to blame it on Daniel, but of course Daniel was not having any of that, and would fight back by saying that he was just listening to orders that she had given him. But either way, on July 2nd, 2006, all three criminals would be convicted of the murders of Suzanne's parents. Suzanne and Daniel would receive 40 years behind bars, and Daniel's brother would receive 38 years. And over the next couple of years, Suzanne would do her best to try and get out early by claiming that she had all these disorders and mixed personalities and other things, but every time she appealed, she would get denied. And the worst part was, Suzanne's brother would never recover from the loss of his parents, and he would go on to commit burglary, and once he got caught, he would just tell the police that "I'm lost," which then the police would put him into a psychiatric ward, where till this day no one knows what's going on with him. So that'll be it for today's video of true crime stories, intrigues, or interest, and I highly suggest you subscribe to our YouTube channel, as that's all I do. And if you do subscribe, you can expect a brand new video every week. But with all that being said, thank you for watching, and yeah, goodbye.